Right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's Quick Bites. This is our 15-minute short webinar series. You are here with Nikki Kimball. I'm one of the educational consultants here at Just2Easy, and we are going to be looking at getting to grips with database using j2data. So thank you for giving up your afternoon to join us. So in today's session, we are going to be having a 15-minute tutorial. We're going to look at the database interface. We're going to look at how to create and share a database with your class. I've gathered a couple of database lesson ideas just to point in the right direction. And we're also going to look at using some of the example databases that we have ready to use in Just2Easy. I will be offering a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to pop any questions that you have in the chat, or you can unmute at the end and ask me and put me on the spot. Right, first of all, how can we get into j2data? There are two ways. You can click on our button off the Launchpad, and there's also a button along the ribbon, along the top ribbon there. So either of those will take you into j2data. And there we go. And this is the interface. Now we have various other data tools for you to use, including pictogram, chart, and branch. They can all be found in JIT. We have done Quick Bite sessions on those, so please look at the Quick Bites library to have access to those. We're going to be focusing on database in particular, so this is a great Key Stage 2 resource. It's worth pointing out that we do have some example databases already preloaded, and we are going to have a look at those later, but those can be accessed here in the examples area. We have got a variety of different examples to look at. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at creating a database. Now, I'm going to create a very simple database just for the purposes of speed and convenience. However, this is a great example of a more intricate database that you could create with your students to gather information about themselves to then analyze. So you can see here I've created a database with nicknames, ages, heights, number of siblings, favorite subject, method of transport, foot size. And some of these also have drop-down menus as well. So I'm going to create my own database. So to do that, we're going to open up database, and we're given just a single field. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter a field. So we're going to say name. There we go. Now I have the option to use this drop-down menu. I have a number of different options. I can select text or multiple lines of text, numbers, a Boolean search, a list where I can define my list, currency, date, picture, sound, or video. So that's really good if you're correlating maybe a mini beasts database or something that you've been out and gathered information about, an email, or a phone number. So that gives you that kind of real life context. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave our name as text, because obviously we want them to be able to type in their name. And then as I hit enter, whilst I'm in that field name, it's going to add another field for me. I'm going to add age, and I want that to be a number. So I'm going to use that drop down menu, and I'm going to select the number. And again, I can just hit my enter button to add in another field, and I'm going to put height for this one. I'm going to select number, and I can also select the unit. So I'm going to select centimeters. So that gives my students a bit of an idea of what kind of information I am looking for. Now I can enter default answers if I wanted to. I can add in extra units, and I can make that a unique value, which is different in each row if I wanted to. Now, once I've created my database, I need to save it before I can share it. So we're going to save it just with basic name. And once I've saved it, I can then share with my students. Now, I can do this through my files as well if I wanted to, or you can do it within database. And you can share with either an individual pupil by typing their name, a class, or we can use the drop-down menu here, which is this kind of little blue box. And I can do the usual sharing formalities. So I can share my whole school, my registration class, teaching group if you have those set up, or individual users. And I've also got access to all the other classes in the school. So I'm going to share that with my class. Now, it's important at this point, if I want them to edit that database, if I want them to add in information, to add in a record, I have to tick that box, otherwise they won't be able to do anything. So it really depends on whether you want it a view-only database or whether you want them to interact with it or not. So I'm going to tick that box. Now, the other two boxes are important. We've got lock database and lock in contributor mode. So if I lock the database here, that allows students to just view that database. If I lock it into contributor mode, that means that they can enter information into it. Now, if I leave both of these empty, that also means that they can edit other records. So it depends on how you want your students to interact with those that database. Now, because I've shared that with my class, this is Lottie, she's in my class. She can then open it going to shared files. And she's going to go to list files to see the most recent bits of work. And there's that class test. So you can see there, she can see the database, but she can't edit any of the definition. To input a record, she can go to form. And you can see here, because I've allowed her to edit, she can add in her own record. She can't edit anybody else's. So I'm going to add her ages 9 and maybe 110 centimetres. Once she's added that record, she can click save. She can add multiple records if she wanted to, or you could leave it with just individual records. So now as a teacher, I can refresh that page and I can see there is Lottie's record. So you could do that with all 30 students if you wanted to. You can define your own table, your own database definition, and really tailor it to what you want to do in class. So that is creating a database. So some ideas for lesson plans. And this is an activity that I'm actually creating at the moment. It's a guess who activity with students inputting data and then using that database to then they select one of these people and they play against each other. So one person selects one of these characters, the other person has to use the and the or search functions to refine that search and to figure out who that person is thinking of. Another thing that you could do, you can dig out your data loggers if you're fortunate to have one with your school. And you can use those for some real life context, so logging some data. So here I've got this website. So if you're not familiar with this STEM website, it's www.stem.org.uk. They've got some fantastic STEM resources. And they actually have an amazing resource that is all built around going out into the school grounds, finding data about the plants and animals that live there, logging that data, and also using it in a literacy writing format. So then creating some poetry from that. So it's a really nice resource, but you might want to think about, how you could log some of the data that you've got in and around school. So some real life contexts there. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to show you some existing databases that we've got and how your children can use that data and refine it. So I'm going to be using our Titanic database, which can be found, as I said, within the j2data. You've got these examples here at the bottom. And there are other databases available. So we do have dinosaurs, countries, mini beasts. So these are pulled from real life data records. We're going to be using this one, which is the Titanic passenger list. So if I was to teach this with my students, I would kind of get them to think about, right, how are we going to find out how many children are on board? And at that point, they could then go through the records, but as you can see here, I've got 1,300 records. So we want to get our students to use that database a bit more efficiently. Now, what we could do is I'm going to search for how many females are on board. So we could just search in this search bar here and look for a keyword, which would be female. So we can see there that has refined those records already, and we've got 466 records. Now I might want to refine this even more. I want to find out how many first class females are on board. And what I can do is I can go to my table here, And that expands those records in a more visual format. So I can see them next to each other, but as I said, that's not the best way of looking at the database. So what we can do is we've got our advanced search up here in the top left. So I can click that and that's going to expand that field search for me. So this is a single field search. So what I might want to do is I want to find my gender. I want to define that gender. So I want to equals to, and I want to define the value as female. So that's done pretty much the same thing as we've just done, just in a more intricate way. I'm going to use this button here, which is our and or function, because I want them to be female and in the first class. So now I can use that drop down menu and I can search class equal to, and I'm going to go first class. And there we go. We've got 144 records now. So we can really refine these searches. You can add as many of these and ors as you like, so you can really get into the depths of this data. Now, the other thing I want to do, so I'm just going to delete these field searches, is I can go to my chart tab. So this gives me a more visual format of this data. So what I can do is I can plot some of this data. I'm going to plot, this time I'm going to look at the class versus whether they survived or whether they were a victim. Okay, so I want to see if there's any disparities in the data. So we can see if we add the class into the x-axis, you can see there already, there's more third class passengers than anything else, probably as much as the other two combined. Now I might want to group that slightly and look at whether they survived or whether they're a victim. So I'm going to add in a group, add survivors or victims. So now we can already see we've got a huge disparity, that even though we had more first class on board, less first class on board, that more of the first class survived and more of the third class were victims. Now we can keep this in a bar chart if we want to, or we have our other chart formats here at the top. So I'm going to add that to a pie chart. Now there are other charts available. You can also do things that make it 3D, have it stacked. This is an interactive database, so you can see as I hover over, it allows me to see the numbers, these precise numbers. And then in the bottom left, I've also got things like I can change the colors and I can save that image if I want to. Now, that's a really useful tool to be able to save the image, because that will save an image into my files that I can then use in other applications or other tools within the site. So that brings me to activities that you can do using j2data. So the Titanic database in particular, we do have a resource that is pre-created in the library. All you have to do is search for Titanic. Now I've actually added an additional one. So we've got this one that's the kind of the beginnings of looking into the data. So single field searches. This one will look into the more intricate double field search, adding in that and the or selections. And we've also got some very kind people that have submitted some database searching activities as well. So these, if I open this up, I can share that with my students. So we can use the share button to share that with our class. You can set that as homework. You can also save that. So if you don't want to have to search for Titanic every time, you can save that and it will save into your liked resources. Now this is built around a J2E5 file. So when I open it up, I can add anything in. So I can type over the top and we can add that chart. And I know it's not particularly relevant to this particular resource, but you can see there as I open up my pictures there's my chart. I can drag that in and I could, if I wanted to, start analysing that data, start talking about that data, how we created it, what that data means and what that data shows. So I am bang on 15 minutes. That is the end of our Quick Bites. It was a very whistle-stop tour, I'm sure. We are recording this session and it will be made available along with other Quick Bites recordings. Now, these can be found through the www.just2easy.com/news. Now, there is a link off your Launchpad here. So if you click that and navigate to news, you'll see there's a whole library there with our Quick Bites seminars. So you can scroll through, there are lots. We've already got collaborative databases by my kind colleague at Paul Wright. So we are able to have a look at those if you want to. So they're great for reference points. And that is the end of the Quick Bites webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to either unmute or pop them in the chat. If not, then thank you very much for coming.